At 8:45 a.m. on January 20th, 1953, President-elect Dwight D. Eisenhower sat rigidly in the back of a dark limousine outside the north portico of the White House. The temperature hovered just below 50 degrees. The sky, a heavy gray sheet that pressed cold into the bones. The car did not move. Eisenhower did not move. He refused to open the door, refused to step out, refused to enter the home of the man who waited for him inside. This was no scheduling confusion, no missed signal. Everyone, from secret service agents to household staff, recognized that this was a deliberate gesture, sharp as a blade, pointed directly at President Harry S. Truman. Inside the White House, Truman stood by a tall window, staring out at the motionless limousine. "So that's how it is," he muttered under his breath. J.B. West, the chief usher, lingered several feet behind him and dared not speak. Truman knew what Eisenhower was doing, refusing one of the most symbolic rituals in American political life, the incoming president paying a brief, polite visit to the outgoing one before they rode together to the Capitol. Eisenhower would not sit for coffee, would not exchange pleasantries, would not cross the threshold as a guest. Instead, he waited silently, forcing Truman to walk out to him like a subordinate summoned. The tension extended beyond politics. Eisenhower, 62, was no ordinary president-elect. He was the liberator of Europe, the supreme Allied commander who crushed the Nazi war machine, the man whose name earned reverence from London to Manila. His landslide victory had crowned him the nation's new guardian during the Cold War. But none of that mattered in this moment. What mattered was the fracture, long brewing, now fully exposed, between two men who had once admired each other. And on this cold January morning, that fracture stood between them like a wall of ice. The tragedy of this bitter inauguration day lay in what had once been a genuine bond. Their relationship had begun nearly 8 years earlier, in July 1945, when Harry Truman, barely 3 months into his unexpected presidency after Roosevelt's death, traveled to Germany. There, among the ruins of Berlin, he met the young General Eisenhower. As their car rumbled through streets lined with rubble, Truman studied the disciplined, steady commander beside him and saw not just a military hero, but a future leader of the nation. "You know, Ike," Truman said softly, "there's nothing you might want that I wouldn't help you get." Eisenhower chuckled, dismissing the idea. "Mr. President, I'm a soldier. I don't have a political bone in my body." Truman believed him. So began years of cooperation marked by sincere respect. Truman appointed Eisenhower Army Chief of Staff and awarded him the Distinguished Service Medal. He supported Eisenhower's appointment as the first Supreme Commander of NATO. They exchanged warm letters, posed together at ceremonies, and appeared side by side before cheering crowds. Truman felt he had found in Eisenhower a rare leader, competent, modest, moral, and capable of guiding a nation recovering from global war. In 1947, Truman made an extraordinary offer privately. Disturbed by the possibility of Douglas MacArthur rising to power, he wrote in his diary that if Republicans nominated MacArthur, he would step aside, offering Eisenhower the presidency with Truman himself as vice president. That gesture was not political. It was personal. Truman believed Eisenhower could protect the nation from a man he viewed as dangerously authoritarian. Eisenhower declined again, politely, consistently, and always with the same refrain. He wanted no part in politics. For years, Truman carried an unspoken belief that Eisenhower, loyal, apolitical, honorable, would never betray him. But the seeds of division had already been planted. Everything changed in 1952. Eisenhower, long admired by both Democrats and Republicans, announced he would run for president, not as a Democrat with Truman's blessing, but as a Republican determined to challenge Truman's party and, indirectly, Truman's legacy. To Truman, the announcement felt like a crack in the foundation of trust he had built over years. The shock was less about party affiliation and more about the sense of personal betrayal. Truman had offered him everything, including the presidency itself, and Eisenhower had chosen to stand against him instead. Yet even this wasn't the true breaking point. That moment came with a name: George C. Marshall. Marshall was the architect of Allied victory in World War II, the man who transformed Eisenhower from a little-known colonel into the supreme Allied commander. Marshall had sacrificed the glory of leading D-Day, recommending Eisenhower instead. He had served Truman as Secretary of State and Defense with unwavering loyalty. Truman often called him the greatest living American. But in the feverish climate of the early Cold War, Senator Joseph McCarthy launched a series of explosive accusations, claiming Marshall was at the center of a massive communist conspiracy. The charges were absurd, but they proved politically powerful. Truman fully expected Eisenhower to defend Marshall, his mentor, his sponsor, the man to whom Eisenhower owed his entire rise. Eisenhower initially planned to. His team drafted a paragraph praising Marshall's patriotism for a major speech in Milwaukee, McCarthy's home turf. But advisors warned him, remove it. It'll cost votes. And Eisenhower, after a lifetime of battlefield courage, made a decision he would later regret. He deleted the paragraph. On October 3, 1952, he stood beside McCarthy on stage in silence. The cameras flashed. Truman's fury ignited. The fracture between them widened into a chasm. The consequences were swift and severe. Truman erupted publicly, condemning Eisenhower's silence as cowardice. He attacked the general's failure to defend Marshall at every opportunity, claiming it revealed a character flaw far more dangerous than any policy disagreement. Eisenhower felt ambushed and misrepresented, convinced Truman was twisting his intentions for political weaponry. But for Truman, the wound was deeper than politics. Marshall had been the backbone of Truman's presidency, the man whose advice he trusted, above all others. Marshall had been Eisenhower's patron, friend, and protector. For Eisenhower to stand silent beside McCarthy, the man smearing Marshall, was unforgivable. The situation worsened weeks later in Indianapolis, when Eisenhower campaigned with Senator William Jenner. Jenner had called Marshall a living and affront for traitors. Truman couldn't comprehend why Eisenhower would share a stage with someone who viciously attacked the very man who made Eisenhower's career possible. Eisenhower later admitted the event made him feel dirty, but he did it anyway, believing it necessary to secure victory. Meanwhile, the campaign grew increasingly bitter. Truman and Eisenhower exchanged sharp words from distant podiums. Their letters ceased. Their mutual respect dissolved. Truman's belief that Eisenhower was a fundamentally apolitical man shattered. Eisenhower's belief that Truman respected him collapsed, too. By the time Eisenhower won the election in a landslide, 55% of the vote, 442 electoral votes, the relationship was in ruins. The required meeting in the Oval Office on November 18th was stiff, awkward, and strained. Truman tried to guide him gently through the responsibilities of the office. Eisenhower felt patronized. Truman left thinking Eisenhower understood nothing of political leadership. Eisenhower left thinking Truman was wasting his time. Two men who had once stood united had now become adversaries linked only by the machinery of democracy. The moment Truman stepped outside, the cold January air wrapped around him, like a final reminder of the distance now separating the two men. He walked slowly but with unmistakable dignity down the stone steps toward Eisenhower's waiting limousine. Eisenhower saw him approaching, but his expression did not change. He maintained the same rigid posture, eyes forward, body unmoving. The symbolism struck every witness. The incoming president waiting like a sovereign, the outgoing president approaching like a subordinate. For a brief second, Truman hesitated, just long enough that onlookers felt the entire inauguration tremble on the edge of collapse. Yet Truman continued forward. When he reached the car, neither man extended a hand. Neither smiled. Neither offered even a perfunctory greeting. They exchanged a curt nod, their eyes meeting only briefly, a meeting filled with years of unspoken accusations, disappointments, and regrets. Everything that had happened since 1945 hung between them like a ghost. Truman's admiration, Eisenhower's refusals, Marshall's honor, McCarthy's accusations, political wounds, and personal betrayal. The ride to the Capitol was silent. Two men who had once stood together at victory parades now sat inches apart in the same vehicle, separated by more than physical space. Truman looked out the window, reflecting on the years he had led the free world. Eisenhower stared ahead, already stepping into the role he had won. perhaps wondering what pieces of the past he should carry with him, and which he preferred to leave behind. When they arrived, Truman stepped out first and walked away without looking back. Eisenhower followed moments later, greeted by roaring crowds. The peaceful transfer of power continued as tradition demanded. But the friendship, once full of admiration and possibility, was gone forever.